Part 91. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 913. Both the monk and the Buddha looked a little haggard, and they did look a little weak. This was not surprising. After all, they had just released a lot of soul power. But now they looked at the scene in front of them, and they were both stunned. There are indeed not many scenes that make the two eminent monks so surprised. The tent that Tsubai was originally in had been overturned to nowhere at this time. The powerful soul power turned into an almost substantial cyclone at this time, forming a small but powerful wind whirlpool. Chen Ryu was still sitting there cross-legged, watching the scene in front of her intently. She knew exactly what kind of skills Tsubai was practicing. Su Fugui had been lying in the place of enlightenment for 20 years, so he naturally had his own tricks. And at this time, she was able to experience the amazing self-created skills of the man in the coffin again through Tsubai. A blue-green soul rose up and floated in mid-air. The ordinary person's is called the soul, and the monk's is called the soul. It seems that no matter how much the life level is improved later, most of the lives based on human beings are still based on the physical body plus thinking. The pattern of consciousness carriers exists, but zombies are different. The ancient zombie first revolution is a form of body training. In the past, the Qin army under the command of the first emperor basically practiced to the level of the ancient zombie first revolution, because at that time, this exercise only had one revolution, and there was no such thing as the second revolution or even the third revolution after that. The two turns and the third turn are actually the paths that Su Fugui blazed out on his own based on the first turn. The biggest reason is that monks are human beings after all. There is no problem in refining your body in one turn, but taking it to the next level to achieve a greater degree of immortality in spirit and body is a mistake in terms of direction. People are not zombies, and zombies are not people either. Although the latter is derived from the corpse mutation of the former, the two are completely different species of creatures. In the last story world, Tsubai relied on the initial settings of the story world to restore his original soul state. Even the guy who died long ago was still entangled in his memory and soul, which was tantamount to a difficult struggle. During the mountain climbing journey, everyone else could only climb halfway, but Tsubai climbed to normal and was picked up by a helicopter. After recuperating for a period of time, he was sent to the same location again by helicopter to continue climbing. For others, it is difficult to turn back because there is no such opportunity. Click. The soul floating in the air made a crisp sound at this time. In fact, it is not so much a soul, but a body in another state. It's just that this body is a bit brittle, like glass, and not so durable. Fight, but now Tsubai is completely able to put on a suit of clothes for his soul and live a normal life in the real society. This is a soul strength that many powerful monks can only dream of. But everything has its gains and losses. Forging your soul into the state will certainly make your soul stronger than other people imagine, but it will also prevent your soul from having functions similar to those of a soul. From then on, Tsubai's soul and body could no longer be separated, unless the body collapsed, but the soul would basically collapse after the body collapsed. If he wanted to do what others did after the body collapsed, he would rely on the soul consciousness to escape to form another one. A kind of life extension is impossible for Tsubai. The soul slowly unfolded, condensing into the appearance of Tsubai in a completely delicate form, but the color was obviously wrong. Although the green color had faded, the feeling of substantiality was still very serious, similar to the form of glass. Is this a soul? One hand took out a grilled eggplant slice from the barbecue in front of the fat man. Damn it, you're a ghost, you scared me to death. The fat man glanced at the sudden appearance of Xiezhen angrily. This guy didn't appear just now and now he appears, it's really hard not to wonder if he is hiding on purpose. It's better not to sacrifice the soul power. I had something to do in Chengdu. I received the news that you guys were back and drove over right away. Fortunately, I didn't miss the wonderful scene. Tell me, is this the soul? A soul that is as good as false. What's the difference between this and the physical body? Xie Zhen asked, a little confused. I don't think much about forging the soul into an existence similar to the physical body. Not optimistic, the fat man shook his head. Wait a minute, this is just the beginning. When the soul and the body merge, it is the time to advance. After that, Dabai's body will have the attributes of the soul and can resist most negative attributes. The effect of power, his soul and body are fused together, so, similar to your illusion, the effect on him will be reduced to an outrageous level. Let's put it this way, even if Bimax doesn't advance, it won't be a problem to torture you after the second level. The fat man took another sip of beer, and as if remembering something, he deliberately mocked, oh, I forgot, someone was tortured by Dabai in the northeast half a year ago. After hearing this, Xie Zhen was not angry. What I mean is that the soul and the body walk on 2 feet. Now in order to achieve a breakthrough in a short period of time, 2 feet. Before Xie Zhen could finish speaking, the fat man interrupted rudely, it sounds like we still have a lot of time and a lot of long-term prospects. Xie Zhen was speechless. He was silent for a while and nodded. Yes, the fat man was right. Now, advancement is a race against time. Failure to attain enlightenment means that he will be treated as a slave in 2 years' time. If the garbage is disposed of directly, there is indeed no way out, let alone the long term and future. What do you think of this? Buddha asked the monk in a low voice at this time. The monk shook his head and did not answer the question directly. Instead, he said, Su Fuegui has already died. He did not get on the train. It is said that he died after leaving the place of enlightenment. The cause of death is unknown. These are the 2 poor monks. God found the news. You mean, Su Fuegui's fall is related to Gu Zhan's third turn? According to Dabai's previous view, the first level of ancient zombies was Qin Bing's original body training method, and the second level of soul training and the third level of God training were created by Su Fuegui himself. The poor monk also has this concern. After all, with Su Fuegui with the qualifications of wealth, who can kill him? Or did he die in the story world? Do you think it's possible? Moreover, Su Fuegui did not have an affair with the broadcaster. He was not the kind of people like Su Yuhang and Lu Menjiao who could reach an agreement with the broadcaster to open the back door. How could he survive for more than 20 years and not leave by train? Moreover, that place is also a place of enlightenment, and there is a yellow spring there. Refining the soul should be successful, right? Buddha guessed, if there is a problem, it will probably be in the third round of refining the soul. I remember Chen Ru said that day that Su Fuegui seemed to have transcended something, but the transcendence failed. She only heard this from the group of big guys who had just left. The poor monk even suspected that Su Fuegui died because he suddenly realized that he was dead. It is said that after he left the place of enlightenment, he went to a barren mountain to dig up his old wife's urn. Came out, and then disappeared into ashes. Perhaps this is the real immortality, and it is no longer the exaggeration we said before. Yes side, wait until Subai's second turn is successfully completed, and then tell him about this. Third, there is really no rush when it comes to the third rotation. Now it seems that even Su Fuegui had an accident on the third rotation, which is really inappropriate. However, leaving aside the issues and instability of the third rank, with just the second rank, I feel that it will not be a problem for Dabai to directly break through to the junior level of advanced listener by taking this opportunity, and even reach the peak level of the intermediate level of advanced listener. In terms of immediate combat power, it may be stronger than those of the same level. Because the soul and body completely fit into the zombie, completely breaking off the ancient path of the fallen zombie. In terms of behavior, he completely abandoned the law and completely devoted himself to magic. Just like Chen Ru, his combat power will be terrifyingly strong. It's time to start merging, Buddha reminded. I'm really, Looking forward to it, the monk looked at Chen Ryu subconsciously. In fact, the reason why Chen Ryu was so concerned about this matter was probably because her purpose was to have the incomplete third transformation of the ancient zombie. This woman has been driven crazy by being stuck in this realm. It is possible that she will die if she hears about it in the morning. Suddenly, Sudbai's body also floated, and then directly collided with the soul. The soul melted into the body like a candle melting. At the same time, Sudbai's aura began to skyrocket at this time, and the threshold for advanced listeners was instantly pierced like a fragile white paper. However, this growth has not stopped yet, and it seems that it is still there. It's far from the end. Sudbai's hair turned from lavender to silver gray at this time, and the skin of his body seemed to be dyed with a layer of silver powder at this time. The fat man laughed beside him. Dabai's style has changed from a killer purple hairstyle to Stephen Chow's version of the Shaolin 18 Bronze Man. Sudbai slowly opened his eyes, and a thick and sharp breath burst out. At the same time, the breath that could have been further improved also came to a standstill at this time. Chen Ryu stood up immediately. Why don't you try to break through the intermediate level of advanced audience at this time? Chen Ryu knew that when he first broke through, Sudbai had the momentum to try to break through again. Then it's impossible to attain enlightenment because your potential is overdrawn and stuck. Sudbai's words contained a hint of irony. Hey, the wings are hard, and you are showing off. As soon as you break through, the fat man took another bite of chicken wings, chewed them with big mouthfuls, and looked like he was watching the fun and didn't think it was a big deal. Little sister, flatten him. If you want to stabilize your mood, I don't mind cleaning you up first when you just break through the excitement. Sudbai's words stung Chen Ryu's skin. Of course she couldn't look good now. Sudbai smiled and twitched his index finger at Chen Ryu. He himself was also looking forward to it now. What level of strength would a soulless self have? Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 914. Naturally, it is impossible for these two powerful people who can be regarded as the top level in the current audience circle to really fight because of a disagreement. The reason is nothing more than Sudbai's disapproval of himself and Guzong after he advanced. There was some expectation for the strength after the transfer, while Chen Ryu wanted to check the quality of the so-called ancient zombie technique. Hey, it's really about to start a fight. The fat man was really watching the excitement and didn't think it was a big deal, but he was actually quite curious about the outcome. After all, ever since the Jade Seal Gold incident in Guangzhou, even if he was completely, Sudbai was left behind, and the trend began to get worse. You must know that when the two of them first met, Fatty himself snatched the bronze box from Sudbai. At that time, Fatty was a senior to Sudbai, but now he is so shaken that he can't even see the tail lights of the car clearly. Are you quite excited? Xie Zhen was speechless to the fat man next to him. Sometimes you would think that this huge mass of fat was pure, because any of his hobbies were actually very obvious, but sometimes, I also feel that this guy may be hiding something else under this pure appearance. In other words, at this level, no one is truly innocent anymore. Of course I'm excited to see the excitement, Fatty said matter-of-factly. By the way, in fact, Chen Ryu's realm should be your boss's favorite, right? If this broadcast consciousness will continue to exist. But the mentality is different. She is too anxious and eager, while my boss is trying to stop and suppress himself at all costs, but the blockage is getting stronger and stronger, and he can't suppress it. In fact, my boss's strength should. When Xie Zhen said this, he was silent for a moment, because he knew that his boss's reputation had long been a bit distorted, and several people here had also been in contact with his boss. It felt a bit too deliberate to try to whitewash his boss. I know that Boss Liang is a real person who doesn't show his face. You must have remembered that you asked me to unlock his seal at the country villa, right? Do you know how I felt, Fatty? The fat man was completely stunned when he saw that clone. The breath that leaked out after I unsealed the clone could make my soul start to tremble. Damn it, so we usually say that Boss Liang is cowardly. When I reached a new level, I was just talking about it, because I knew that although Boss Liang was a coward, he was indeed a coward to a certain extent. I don't know if it was because she never showed her real aura in front of me when I was with Li Ji before, but I really don't think Boss Liang is much worse than Li Ji. He may be just timid, really just he was timid, and he must have been from the same era as Lizzie. He deliberately suppressed himself so that he actually attained enlightenment a generation later than Lizzie. Hearing what the fat man said, Xie Zhen was a little surprised at first, but slowly, something else appeared in his eyes. How could this fat man be so thoughtful? This topic was stopped here, partly because a fight was about to start over there, and partly because it would be too superficial to talk any further. On the other end, it was Chen Ryu who took the lead in launching the offensive. Subai and others had seen Chen Ryu fight with a boss-level audience member. Although they could not be said to be evenly matched, they were definitely not defeated. At this time, Chen Ryu's moves also seemed a bit unsophisticated, but at this moment, the chi on the entire mountainside seemed to be stagnant. This is an absolute vacuum created by absolute power. It is more like a kind of depression before the storm. Most people have this understanding, that is, the more dull the thunderstorm is before the thunderstorm, the more overwhelming it will be, and the subsequent thunderstorm will be the bigger it is, the more majestic it is. At this time, Subai was like a small boat drifting on the sea before the storm. It seemed that it might capsize at any time, but Subai did not take a step back. Since it was a discussion, since it was a mutual test, then there is no need to go through so many twists and turns like a life and death fight, just go straight. Subai took the initiative and rushed over, his fists shining brightly, as if a layer of silver gray was floating and spinning. From the perspective of the picture effect, Subai's side was undoubtedly more interesting, but everyone watching the battle below actually knew in their hearts. Although Subai had just advanced, there was still a big gap between him and this woman. Sure enough, when the fists of the two sides collided, Subai's right arm was directly shattered, the bones and flesh fell apart, and the blood instantly turned into blood mist and spread around. This was their first fight. Chen Ryu did not continue to move forward and take advantage of the situation to throw a second punch. She was not aiming to defeat Subai. In fact, she knew that unless the man in front of her advanced to the advanced audience level, she would not be able to fight against him. I basically have no chance of winning. Subai also staggered. There was no pain on his face, but his throat felt a little dry, as if he was very hungry. The next moment, the faces of Buddha and the monk suddenly changed, because they suddenly discovered that a force was approaching them and trying to steal their own power. The fat man and Xie Zhen on the other side also sensed the same situation, and everyone immediately stabilized themselves. His mind repels this power from his body to prevent it from turning into a monster. But then, the vegetation in this area began to slowly wither, and then Subai's arm was recovering at an astonishing speed visible to the naked eye. Chen Ryu stood aside and waited, watching Subai's arm fully recover, but Subai's aura did not weaken at all. This meant that the power to restore the arm did not come from Subai himself. Immortal. The monk murmured to himself, so that's what it means. This is not a recovery caused by the power of the vampire bloodline in Dabai's body, but a change that occurred after the second turn of the ancient zombie. It directly and forcefully seizes the life within the surrounding area, whether it is soul or physical power. As long as the energy level is lower than him, those who are unable to resist this kind of plunder will become part of their internal strength. And it can be seen that Dabai's control of this kind of power is still relatively unfamiliar, at least for now. Once he becomes proficient, non-boss level listeners can't kill him at all. Even if several high-level listeners join forces, it's impossible to kill him unless an absolute dead zone is arranged in advance or an isolation formation is set up, but it still has to be Dabai foolishly jumped in to create this prerequisite. Otherwise, in the past, Subai relied on the blood of the blood clan to repair and use the power in his own body, but now he is surrounded by his power supply. He can completely use local materials and use them locally. He is immortal and immortal. This is true immortality. Meaning. The monk side. Is it because of the perfect fusion of soul and body? In one turn, Gu Zhan actually has the ability to absorb the power of the dead. It is similar to Subai's bloodline. However, the vampire bloodline only restores the blood, while Gu Zhan's first turn absorbs the power of the dead. The essence was integrated into his own body for tempering and improvement. When the first emperor pacified the six kingdoms, he went around to conquer the barbaric lands in order to train his troops to increase their strength by killing and absorbing the enemy's strong soldiers to face the broadcast. The advent of Will. It's a pity that Su Fuegui didn't exist back then. If Su Fuegui's pioneering skills were available, the soldiers of the Qin dynasty could practice to the second level of ancient zombie. Then a group of almost immortal soldiers, 100,000 people, haha. One broadcast would only be broadcast once. The big-name audience may not be able to watch enough. Buddha said. It's unrealistic. First of all, there are specific conditions for the second transformation of the ancient zombie. This specific condition is almost impossible to replicate without the particularity of the broadcast story world. Su Fuegui probably created this technique under specific conditions. Another point, don't forget, there is no turning back in everything. Dabai accepted the inheritance from Su Fuegui in disguise, but Su Fuegui died after leaving the place of enlightenment. He may even be in the place of enlightenment. He is just a dead person, and Dabai Guhan has already reached his second turn. Whether the third turn can be avoided is still unknown. After all, this is an incomplete technique, a technique with fatal flaws. So far, including Dabai, the death rate of this technique is 50%. This technique is really too overbearing and cannot be perfect. But if this technique is a sharp sword hanging upside down above the head, wouldn't the radio's plan and process of destroying the listeners be countless times more terrifying? Anyway, it's all about surviving in death, and the worst outcome is also the most normal. As a result, this is no longer considered gambling because there are no chips and no choice. Subai shook his newly grown right arm, crossed his fingers and made a crisp sound, and then took the initiative to rush towards Chen Ryu again. The two sides then started to go back and forth in the air with the most direct fists and kicks. Battle. With every collision, part of Subai's body would be broken, but then, Subai, who seemed to have gradually become accustomed to this method, recovered faster and faster. Chen Ryu had just kicked one of Subai's legs to pieces. In a moment, the leg appeared again, but the vegetation on the mountain under its feet was even more dead. It stands to reason that it should be a very satisfying thing to fight. After all, you have a cheating bug with infinite blood tank. However, Subai did not get more and more excited as he fought. In the end, he even took the initiative to reach out to signal Chen. Ryu stopped attacking. Then Subai slowly landed, knelt on one knee on the ground, and pinched his head with both hands, as if he was enduring some great pain. This scene made the four people below a little confused. What is going on? Chen Ryu also landed in front of Subai and asked, "What's wrong?" "I feel like there are a lot of things in my mind, too many things that don't belong to me," Subai said in a painful tone. "Oh, is this the sequelae or shortcoming of this technique? You have robbed their vitality, and their consciousness and soul have also been integrated into your consciousness. If I am your real enemy this time and want to kill you, spend a while like this and you'll kill yourself." The monk who heard this suddenly thought of Su Fuegui. How did he die? He has been lying down for 20 years and killed countless guardians of the Western Enlightenment land. But is it possible that the guardians he killed were also his murderers? You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Disyao. Chapter 915. This side effect is much more serious than I thought. Chen Ryu walked up to Subai and put her hand on Subai's forehead. Haha, just the weak spiritual consciousness of those plants can cause such great confusion. As a result, if you are placed in a battle on an ancient battlefield, you may actually go crazy while fighting. Vegetation has its own consciousness, but its consciousness is very weak. However, during the fight between Subai and Chen Ryu just now, all the vegetation on the mountainside was forcibly plundered and absorbed by Subai. In terms of quantity, it was terrifying. Yes, they may not be strong, and some spirits may even be very gentle, but one gentle spirit is gentle, and if millions of them are gentle together, it will be really torturous. Cold sweat continued to flow from Subai's face, and the pain on his face became more and more intense. Most of the people present knew Subai well and knew that this guy would never show it if he was not really in pain to a certain extent. The monk and the Buddha staggered up, preparing to bless Subai with Dharma to dissolve the consciousness of those spirits. The fat man stopped watching the excitement, left the barbecue and walked over to Subai, drawing talismans with his empty hands. Heavenly Lord is above me, please bring me to my original source. A light blue talisman just fell on Subai's forehead. The fat man began to recite the Taoist Heart Sutra and worked with the monk and Buddha to help Subai dispel the massive amount of consciousness he had absorbed. Even Ji Zhen didn't seem too embarrassed to continue watching from the side. What he strengthened was illusion, and he did have a very professional advantage in dealing with these spiritual and conscious things. Chen Ryu watched the scene from the side and curled her lips. To be honest, she was quite disappointed in her heart. It was not that she was disappointed with Subai. After all, judging from the time it took for Subai to become an audience, he would be able to reach the intermediate level of an advanced audience at this time. They are already the absolute best. Of course, everyone here, even those with relatively average talents, are definitely the leaders among the audience of their generation because of Liang Sen's support. The others are just stronger than him, not weaker than him. This is a very special group. If the world hadn't been almost completely conquered, this group of people could have become the most dazzling group among a generation of listeners. Unfortunately, in this post-listener era, a lot of things seem to have been lost. It's past meaning. Su Fugui, is this your self-created technique? It seems that it is indeed useless. A technique that simply seeks to repair one's own losses through plunder has huge drawbacks. You can find a lot of them just by searching. What's the use of this technique? Chen Ryu looked at the scene of several people over there helping Subai relieve his pain, and found it very ironic. They weren't going to a boxing match, so who would have so many backup medical teams around them? It wasn't until the morning of the next day that the monk and Buddha took Weary Rong to the tent to rest. Xie Zhen was a little better. After all, he didn't contribute his soul power before. The pained look on Subai's face disappeared, but there were still a lot of impurities in his eyes, and his consciousness was very clear, but the awkward feeling still existed. Dabai, did you listen to what the monk just said? Su Fugui actually got GG. There must be something wrong with this guy's technique now. Let's just take it easy, Fatty reminded. Subai did not answer. In fact, he is a practitioner of this technique. Now he has just experienced the strong side effects of this technique. His experience of this technique must be deeper than anyone else. If Gu Zhan's third transformation can allow you to go further, it's actually not a loss. If you succeed in proving the truth by then, it will be enough to rescue your son. Ji Zhen was smoking a cigarette next to him. This it's a father's love like a mountain. Although there is some ridicule in Xie Zhen's words, it has to be said that it is indeed what Subai is thinking. In this current environment and era, what can be really done and what is meaningful to do, there really wasn't much left, and I really took a step back and said that if I could rescue the little guy, I wouldn't have too many regrets. At this time, Fatty's cell phone rang. Fatty answered the phone, said hey, hello a few times, his face became a little unhappy, and then he hung up the phone. What happened? Sudbai asked. My aunt just left. The fat man reached out and touched his face. Obviously, his mood suddenly became very low. This aunt should be very important to the fat man. Sudbai had never heard the fat man say anything about his family in detail. He only knew that his grandfather had crawled out of the dead after the Japanese invaded Nanjing and begged for food all the way to Chongqing, the capital of the country. After that, he settled in Sichuan. He only knew that his grandfather and father were both gentlemen, but Fatty never said any specific details. I need to go back for a while. My aunt's home is in Lashan. The fat man took out his mobile phone and looked at the tickets, but after thinking about it, he decided to drive and put his mobile phone away. Let's go together, Sudbai said. The monk and Buddha will stay and rest. I will go to Lashan with you. You don't need to rest yourself, the fat man asked. In fact, Fatty wants to ask you, don't you want to stay with your son? But when I think about it, it seems that there is not much difference and significance between Sudbai staying here and not staying here. At least you are your elder. I should go and see him due to both emotion and reason. Okay, I won't be pretentious anymore, General Manager Xie, you drive. I can't drive now, the fat man said to Xie. Xie Zhen was a bit dumbfounded. He said it as if you were going to be killed in a car accident. Now you are too lazy to drive. Just say it. Fatty went to say goodbye to the monk and Lord Buddha briefly. The monk and Lord Buddha also knew that it was really inconvenient for them to walk around in their current situation, and they were not far away from the next story world. With the lessons learned from Sudbai and Fatty before, so they really need to prepare and plan well. Chen Ryu couldn't find her figure, and she didn't know where she went. However, strictly speaking, this woman was not a member of the crowd. Sudbai was originally a little worried that Chen Ryu would feel that he had not given her a copy. Tombstone continued to run around and was sullen. After all, she had helped Sudbai take down a big boss before, but now it was indeed Sudbai who owed her. It's okay now, she's not here, let's go first. As the car drove out, Sudbai looked back at the orphanage on the top of the mountain. He suddenly felt that this feeling seemed familiar. In the past, he would leave the little one at Lao Fang's house and then go out to do his own thing. Now after leaving, the little guy still stayed at home obediently. It's a pity that he can't enter that home now. Fatty's mood was very low all the way. He was usually known as a social butterfly in the audience and seemed to want to liven up the atmosphere at all times. But now when it was his turn to be comforted by others, no one could take on the job. You ask Sudbai to comfort people? Based on Sudbai's habitual way of chatting and communicating with Fatty, it would be good if he didn't make Fatty faint again. Xie Zhen only cared about driving and didn't think about comforting anyone. Of course, everyone knows in their hearts that fat people don't need others to comfort them. I have experienced many strong winds and waves, and I have seen many things that come and go between life and death. I cannot take them lightly, but at least I can learn to let go. Lashan is actually not far from the small county where the orphanage is located, and Lashan is also a small city located in Sichuan. Outsiders know the name of the city mostly because of the Lashan giant Buddha. Of course, we also have to rely on the movie Wind and Cloud. The Lashan giant Buddha served as the background many times in that movie. This feeling is just like the movie The Legend of the Dragon in Dali. However, what is different from what people who have never been here think is that the Lashan giant Buddha is not in the mountains outside Lashan city. It is located in the city. A giant Buddha squats there, surrounded by the river. It is a tall modern building. Look, the Buddha is looking at us. Xie Zhen pointed at the big Buddha head that appeared in front of him and said with a smile. This giant Buddha is to Len what the terracotta warriors and horses are to Lintung. It can be regarded as a rich tourism heritage left by the ancients to future generations. Subai had never been to Lashan before, and it seemed that Xiezhen had not been either, but looking at the fat man like this, the two of them were not so bored that they decided to go to the scenic spot first and send the fat man to his aunt's house first. The fat man pointed to the road, and the car drove into a place called Sun Island. It was not far from the city, and it was just across a river from the big Buddha, but it felt like a rural area, different from the city. The contrast is very clear. There is only enough space for one car to drive on one road. When encountering another car, it has to move and stop in advance to let one party pass. After driving to the innermost part, the view suddenly becomes clearer. Because it has rained in the past few days, the water surface has risen a lot and the water flow is relatively fast. This location is considered the best location because you can see the big Buddha across the river. Panoramic view. Farmers along the line have also made their own farmhouses. Fatty's aunt's family seemed to be living a good life. They also built a large plastic shed on the riverside in front of their house and opened a tea house. There was also a XX farmhouse sign hanging at the gate. It's just that today the shed in front is full of wreaths, and there are many people coming in and out, so it feels messy. Before Subai could talk to Xiezhen, the fat man picked up the white linen that had been prepared for some time and wrapped it around his waist. Then he got out of the car and shouted, "What a mess it is, where is the music? Why can't I hear the music? Brother Bai is here. Brother Bai, we are too close to the scenic spot. We are not allowed to play sad music or play drums and gongs." A young man walked up to the fat man and handed him a cigarette. With a pop sound, the fat man slapped the young man in front of him on the face. "You look like a coward. Is it your mother who died or my mother? Give the team to the fat man and I will invite him. My aunt is gone, but I can't let my aunt leave in such a deserted way. Anyone coming over there will say I asked you to go to jail for you." Ji Zhen, who was sitting in the car, shook his head and suddenly said, "He can save people. There are countless ways to save his aunt's life." "He can see clearly," Subai said, "but I can't see clearly." "It's harder to look away than not to look away," Xiezhen added. "If you had sent your son to a temple and cut off the relationship with him, he would not be used as a bargaining chip to blackmail you today. Something happened." "I'm happy." Subai immediately pictured the little guy crawling to the demon cave alone to save himself. "My son is also happy." Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 916. With the intervention of the fat man, the funeral was finally organized in an orderly manner. The mournful music from the loudspeaker was played, and everyone who came to help knew what they were responsible for. The fat man was originally born as Mr. Bai Shi, and these things were his previous profession. Now he is naturally able to do them with ease, and he can give some rules for every taboo and every point. Although in today's society, even in rural areas, people are really superstitious. There were not many people, but the majority of people had the mentality of rather trusting the fat man than trusting him at all, so everyone was bluffed into believing it. Some old men and women even deliberately tried to start a relationship with the fat man. It is also self-evident. Furthermore, maybe there is a little bit of guilt in my heart. The fat man went to such great lengths to organize this funeral with the intention of making amends. After all, he really did what he said, "I will not die even if I'm afraid of death." Rescue thing. However, this guilt is actually nothing, just like the old firefighter could only watch the fire devour his son. You are not actually God. As the saying goes, one person achieves enlightenment and a chicken or a dog ascends to heaven, which is not suitable for the audience. On the contrary, since you have fallen into hell, you can easily drag your whole family to be buried with you. This has to be said to be a kind of black irony. The treatment of radio listeners is still not comparable to that of civil servants, and family members and relatives really cannot benefit from it. Subai and Xiezhen seemed a little embarrassed at this time. They were following Fatty. Fatty was too embarrassed to order them to help with anything, so they simply ordered 2 cups of black tea at the farmhouse next door. And a plate of melon seeds. Across the river is the big Buddha. It's quite interesting to sit here and knock melon seeds and drink tea while looking at the big Buddha. There are stone steps up and down on both sides of the big Buddha. There are many tourists, and the queue is almost full. The whole queue moves at a turtle speed. It's moving. A visit to the big Buddha may take much longer than waiting in line for a ride at Shanghai Disneyland. Will you call us to eat later? Xiesun suddenly asked while munching melon seeds. The more I eat these melon seeds, the more hungry I feel. Go and tell Fatty how many dishes you want to order, and ask the chefs to cook them specially for you. Subai glanced at him in explanation. Hey, this is boring. Didn't you ask me to ask for a beating? You know it yourself. Don't worry, Fatty won't forget us. Subai didn't say a word, although we didn't seem to do anything when we came. At this time, a taxi came over with several foreigners. The foreigners probably discovered that a funeral was being held here when they were visiting the scenic spot on the other side. They were very curious about the customs in rural China, so they took a taxi and took a long way around to have a look. And took photos very enthusiastically with the camera. Foreigners are also very busy. Xiezhen stretched. By the way, you and Fatty have gained a lot from entering the story world this time. Haha, luck. Your answer is like I'm borrowing money from you. Xiezhen smiled. At this moment, the fat man who had been busy for a while came over here, grabbed some melon seeds, kneaded them in his hands, and said, "You two go to the scenic spot opposite. I know a friend who is the director of the scenic spot. No admission fee is required." Subai and Xiezhen didn't know how to answer the call. If they wanted to go, they could just walk across the river. Even if they wanted to stand on the top of the Buddha's head and dance, no one could stop them. The fat man seemed to see what they were thinking, and sighed. When visiting scenic spots and historical sites, you have to adjust your mentality. Isn't it nice to be an ordinary person and get a free ticket to visit? Are you okay? Subai noticed something was wrong with the fat man. He seemed to be more cheerful than when he came in the car just now. Managers will come over soon to stop and warn about the funeral. At that time, I may have to leave them to come and kowtow to my aunt. My aunt has lived a cautious life all her life. Now that she is gone, I have to let her go. Take a more scenic walk. Only then did Subai and Xiezhen realize that Fatty wanted to do something outrageous, and he didn't want to implicate the two of them with the cause and effect. Of course, the cause and effect was definitely not as big as Subai's previous murder of the audience, but Fatty wanted to take full responsibility for it. Subai also knew that it was not appropriate for him to say passionate words like "it's all friends who bear the burden" at this time. It was estimated that the fat man's real purpose was to pay a price and receive some punishment for his aunt, so that he could feel better. Okay, let's go shopping as ordinary people and visit this giant Buddha. Subai stood up and said. Xiezhen also stood up. Since Subai was not going to join in the fun, there was no need for him to say anything else and just went to drive the car out. Have fun, Fatty shouted to Subai, who got into the car. You too. Subai closed the car door. I'm a little tired. I said, you don't really want to go into the scenic spot and walk around slowly like those people. Xiezhen continued while driving. There is indeed a lot to see the scenic spots from the perspective of an ordinary person. I mean it in a big way, but from an ordinary person's perspective, I think if I were to line up next to someone in a line, I would be depressed. Okay, let's just buy tickets for the cruise and take the cruise to see what's going on outside. Haha. Xiezhen was obviously satisfied. When the car came out of Sun Island and drove around in a circle to the other side, Xiezhen rolled down the window and pointed to the street on the right. Grandma Yeleng Chuan, it seems to be quite famous in Lishan, would you like to try it? I still like to eat hot pot, and I also think you might not be used to cold skewers. Okay, let's go on the boat for a walk first, and I'll try it when I get back. The ferry ticket costs 70 yuan per person. Subai didn't have any cash with him, and the ferry port seemed to be afraid of trouble. There was a sign with Alipay and WeChat with a big red cross on it, so he finally paid for the ticket. From an ordinary person's perspective, you owe me 70. Is your head broken? Subai couldn't help but laugh. It feels like you suddenly became a little abnormal. It's the idea, the idea. The two got on the boat and followed the ladder to the second floor. Most of the tourists were on the second floor because later the cruise ship would specially drive to a position facing the big Buddha so that tourists could take pictures. But obviously, although Subai and Xiachen were driven out by the fat man to wander around, they were really not so down to earth that they kept taking photos with their phones like the tourists around them. Even if they were not, the audience probably wouldn't be like this based on their character. This is a matter of philosophy. Xia Zhen continued what he had just said. Nothing has an absolutely pure entity, just like many simple substances in chemistry. They cannot exist as pure entities under natural conditions. Yes, it needs to be purified and prepared in the laboratory. The same goes for people. There is no completely relaxed person in this world, unless he is a fool. If you have been a rich second generation, you should also know that people at any level will have their own troubles. An ordinary tramp, although heaven and earth can make a bed, he cannot enjoy high-end hotels and other life that require high consumption to support him. No one with a normal enterprising spirit will ever be in a completely pure state. Subai originally planned to interrupt Xia Zhen's words because he felt that Xia Zhen was a bit nonsense, but soon Subai discovered that something was wrong. Xia Zhen seemed to have entered a kind of stimulation. The state of enlightenment. Hey, is this Buddha so smart? There was no way. Although Subai's relationship with Xia Zhen was not as deep as that with Fatty Monk and the others, in short, they had helped him. Since the other party was in this state, he was too embarrassed to interrupt, so he could only act as a listener beside him. In line with Xia Zhen's explanation, many nearby tourists cast strange looks at Xia Zhen, obviously feeling that there seemed to be something wrong with the head of this man who started talking about some inexplicable philosophy of life as soon as he got on the cruise ship. The more Subai listened, the more he understood. The main enhancement of Ji Zhen was illusion, and the most basic element of constructing an illusion was to create an illusion that was enough to pierce the target's mental defenses with fakes and real ones. Ji Zhen's words were actually full of a sense of opposition. The deeper enlightenment and enlightenment of human nature, or in other words, it is no longer purely human nature, but gradually becomes bigger, a bit similar to the world view. At this time, the cruise ship had arrived directly opposite the giant Buddha. Tourists around him began to take pictures excitedly. Xia Zhen's speech also began to slow down, but his eyes seemed to be getting brighter and brighter. In the end, after he finished speaking, he breathed a long sigh of relief, picked up the mineral water of a female tourist who was taking photos next to him and took 2 big sips. Enlightened by the enlightenment, enlightenment by the enlightenment. After saying this, Xia Zhen actually bowed to the Buddha, as if he was thanking the Buddha for his advice. Subai shook his head speechlessly, and suddenly said on a whim, "Come, help me take a photo with your great benefactor." "Oh no, help me take a photo with your great benefactor. You're a zombie. If you take a photo with the giant Buddha so close, aren't you afraid that he will slap you to death?" Although Ji Zhen made a joke, he still picked up his phone and pointed the camera at Subai, and at the same time, the distant view also included the giant Buddha. Subai leaned sideways on the railing casually, but suddenly, there were screams of terror from the tourists on the cruise ship, and there were also screams from the tourists at the giant Buddha scenic area on the shore not far away. Voice. Xia Zhen, who was looking at the camera on his mobile phone, saw the Lishan giant Buddha behind him weirdly raising his palm. As the rocks fell, the Buddha's hand stretched out and patted the boat here. "Subai, you." Ji Zhen moved his phone and pointed it behind Subai. Subai calmly took out a cigarette, lit it, and said, "Come on, you just realized it and started experimenting on me, right? But your illusion is quite realistic. If I hadn't known it was you, I didn't do it, it's true. I lied to you, I was raised by you," Ji Zhen shouted directly. He knew that Subai would never believe it if he didn't say such cruel words at this time. Subai. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 917. Since Ji Zhen said such close-to-face words, it proves that this matter really has nothing to do with him. Therefore, this place should not be an illusion. Everything that happened at this time is real. But it was really hard for Subai to imagine that such a thing would happen in the real world. Back then, even gold had to survive, and that butterfly with strange abilities could only huddle in a dark corner. All these heretics that did not conform to the definition of the scientific and technological civilization plane in the real world would be suppressed, and they were suppressed miserably. Very miserable. But under this environment and under this premise, this giant Buddha built in the Tang dynasty suddenly came alive. The huge palm had been placed on his knee for more than 1,000 years and never moved. Now it's like swatting a fly and it's falling on him. Unscrupulous. It's really unscrupulous. You must know that this is a scenic spot. What happens here will be spread quickly and cause a great sensation. At the same time, it will set off a series of chain reactions and subvert people's worldview. The status of religion and science will also be impacted again. Be redefined. Although Subai believes that radio can solve all this, after all, there is a lesson learned from Lychee erasing a city, but Lychee is a listener after all, and this time, this big Buddha seems to wake up suddenly and take action against him. This feeling and motivation is completely different from the audience. Subai did not think that there was any control from the audience behind this giant Buddha, because after that group of people left on the train, in the real world, except for the top boss Liang, there was no big boss who could urge this giant Buddha to manifest. This kind of mentality is impossible for non-big level listeners to accomplish. Xie Zhen spread his hands, and a blue light rose up, encircling the entire cruise ship. "Stand back, I'll go meet him. I want to see what the hell he is." Subai looked very calm when facing the huge palm crashing down with majestic pressure, and jumped out of the cruise ship. Take the initiative to break away from the protective circle created by understanding. Be careful, don't be suppressed by the Buddha for 500 years. Seeing that Subai took the initiative to attack, Ji Zhen simply withdrew his defense, rose into the air, and landed steadily on the water. He had no intention of doing so. To protect those ordinary people, this is not his fault. Broadcasting is a very reasonable existence, but fortunately, broadcasting is not so stupid as to like moral kidnapping. Boom! Subai's fist collided with the palm of the Buddha. For a moment, the waves on the river rolled up. Countless cruise ships were overturned in an instant. Many tourists who were watching the Buddha on Lashan also stumbled and fell. However, rays of Buddha's light shot out from the center of the Buddha's eyebrows, and the people in the water and the people on the mountain were enveloped in the Buddha's light, and were then safely placed in a safe area. When the big Buddha was doing these things, Subai, who had just punched the big Buddha, did not take the opportunity to take action, but just stood on the river and looked at the big Buddha. After the giant Buddha safely dispelled all the tourists around him, his figure suddenly trembled. Just now he just raised his palms, but this time the entire huge Buddha body suddenly stood up, and even the rocks around it stood up. At this time, it collapsed, as if a volcano that had been silent for thousands of years suddenly erupted, and the dark clouds in the sky instantly suppressed, creating a scene of doomsday. What is the difference between Buddha and demon? Don't think that when Buddha fights, the sky is filled with rays of light and the Dharma is solemn. Even monks often behave crazier than Buddha when they fight. On the other side of the river, the fat man stretched out his hands, and a formation enveloped him, blocking the river waves in the sky from outside. At the same time, the people inside who were busy with the funeral could not sense what was happening outside. Dabai, do you need my help? Fatty stood at the edge of the field and shouted to Subai. No, you continue to do your business. Subai rubbed his fists. This big Buddha looked mighty and majestic, and it had a kind of Buddha power, but the pressure on Subai was much less than that of Chen Ryu. Subai was confident in himself. It can be dealt with. Moreover, Subai could sense that it seemed that it was his approach that caused the Buddha to suddenly change. The other party's target was very clear, and it was him, so he would be next. The huge Buddha body stood majestically, whipping up waves of strong winds that roared out. However, these strong winds did not turn into the power to destroy the surrounding cities. Instead, they circled upside down in the void and rushed towards Subai. Haha, why do I feel like this guy is Ultraman and a monster? He fights and takes care of nearby cities and humans. This was what Subai shouted to Ji Zhen behind him. I tried to penetrate the deeper layers of his consciousness to see what was going on. Xie Zhen sat cross-legged, his figure floating steadily on the water, and at the same time the blue light shrouded him again, and his consciousness instantly penetrated into the Buddha and began to capture the consciousness of the Buddha. This was very important to Xie Zhen. It's not difficult to say. Ice. Everything around Subai seemed to have been pressed in slow motion at this time. Even the air and light seemed to be at a standstill at this time, including the strong winds that were aimed directly at him. The big Buddha's attack method seemed to be very simple and crude. Taking advantage of his big body, he stepped on him again. It was obvious that he wanted to use his physical advantage to forcefully eat Subai. Subai's body skin showed a dark green light, and his arms were placed above his head. Boom! The next moment, Subai's whole body was stepped under the water, and the giant Buddha's huge figure also tilted down, and his body tilted sideways, as if it did not expect that Subai would be so unstepped, which finally led to the giant Buddha fell from the rocky side where it was originally standing, causing the water level here to surge sharply. The waves generated by the lake, which was originally only the size of a small canal, were no less than those caused by a storm deep in the ocean. Boom! There was a huge roar under the water, similar to a bomb explosion. The feet of the giant Buddha, who had just entered the water, like a person playing in the water, suddenly cramped, and the body fell again and fell completely into the lake with its back facing down. However, the depth of the river, obviously there is no way to submerge this giant Buddha. The giant Buddha looks like a giant baby sitting in a bathtub, holding both sides of the bank with his hands, which looks a bit funny. A green light shot out from the bottom of the river, then appeared directly above the head of the big head, and stepped on the big Buddha's face. Subai was a master who disrespected gods and Buddhas. Even if it was a real Buddha, he would dare to step on it if it offended him, not to mention the statue that suddenly went crazy for some unknown reason. Boom! A golden lotus shot out from the center of the Buddha's eyebrows. Subai kicked the golden lotus. The golden lotus instantly turned into boundless karma fire and enveloped Subai. In an instant, boundless fear and endless Sanskrit sounds pierced into the void from all directions. He entered Subai's consciousness and body, and began to strangle the zombie evil spirit in Subai's body most crazily. Grass. Subai had to stop himself and landed on the head of the Buddha. He covered his forehead with one hand and controlled the balance of his body with the other hand. In the past, Subai could have carried it, but before that, he had just fought with Chen Ryu to test the second level of ancient zombies, and his sea of consciousness was almost overwhelmed by the flowers and plants on the hillside, even if there was a monk Buddha. They solved it for themselves, but the residual disease was still there. At this time, Yahuo's offensive seemed more like taking advantage of the opportunity, and just caught Subai's painful foot. However, Subai did not panic because of this, because with his current physique, it would be difficult to kill him even if he was pressed to the ground and the giant Buddha kept beating his chest with its huge little fist. But this giant Buddha seems to be very intelligent. It can be seen from the fact that it also releases Buddha's light to disperse dangerous tourists around. It can be seen that it is not a killing machine in the pure sense. The Buddha's slightly narrowed eyes suddenly opened completely at this moment, and a virtual shadow of Buddha monument was released from the position of its left eye. The top of the inscription is engraved with the great Maitreya stone statue of Lingyun Temple in Jiuzhu. After the shadow of this inscription was projected from the pupils of the Buddha statue, it began to get bigger, and gradually evolved into an overwhelming force. In fact, historically, it was precisely because of the discovery of this cliff monument during the National Restoration Project of Lushan Giant Buddha in 1989 that the real name of this giant Buddha was officially determined. The name Lushan Giant Buddha was only used by people later. It was called that way, and it has the same nature as the cat and panda being called panda. It can be said that this inscription is the identity mark of the Lushan Giant Buddha, similar to the plaque on the forehead of the statue of the Buddha in the Buddhist temple. At this time, the shadow of the inscription directly hit Sudbai, and it contained a terrifying meaning. The power of seal. Ba. The fat man, who was watching the battle from a distance and continuing to preside over the ritual, finally took action at this time. The ant was his closest relative, but she was an old friend after all, and Sudbai was his friend. The fat man could naturally tell the difference between the more important and the more important. Furthermore, Dabai came to his home with him to pay homage to his deceased relatives, which was considered as a courtesy to a friend. If it weren't for him, Dabai would not have suddenly come to Lushan. He couldn't watch him being directly treated like Sun Hao or Hao. The seal was suppressed. The fat man's figure appeared in front of Sudbai in an instant. He drew Tianjun talisman with his left hand and Sanking seal script with his right hand. In a moment, two talismans, one red and one purple, were drawn by the fat man in the air, and he was directly attacked. The shadow of the inscription. Dabai, there's something weird about this. Let's work together to suppress it first, the fat man said at this time. Sudbai's eyes were a little red. The karma fire released by the golden lotus was still burning him at this time, which made Sudbai's inner fire keep rising. Let me smash this giant Buddha to pieces first. As soon as he finished speaking, Sudbai raised his fist and hit the big Buddha's jaw with all his strength. Xiezhen, who had been sitting cross-legged in the distance before, suddenly opened his eyes and shouted. Don't be impulsive, there is something sealed inside the Buddha, and it wants you to break it and set it free. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Disyao. Chapter 918. Sudbai's fist was just about to touch the jaw of the Buddha. After hearing Xiezhen's warning, he suddenly withdrew his strength. It was as if the force of the punch was completely retracted and backfired on himself. He immediately took several steps back, and the corner of his mouth there was also a stream of blood spilling out. Xiezhen's figure appeared above the Buddha, and he pressed his hands down. His left eye disappeared, leaving only a gray light. If you move again, I will cut off the connection between you and this giant Buddha and completely trap you to death, Xiezhen said. The originally agitated giant Buddha also calmed down at this time, and seemed to have returned to its initial sitting posture. However, the giant Buddha lying in the river now is in two completely different postures from the giant Buddha that had been sitting in Lushan for more than 1,000 years. The momentum just now has not completely dissipated yet. Xiezhen slowly squatted down and placed the palm of his left hand against the Buddha, as if he was having a deeper communication with it. The shadow of the cliff monument also disappeared. The fat man withdrew his two spells, took 2 steps back, stood next to Sudbai and asked. Are you okay? Sudbai shook his head to indicate that he had no big problem, but still shouted to Xiezhen in front of him. Can you be more prompt next time? It's not fun to keep people under the knife. The light in Ji Zhen's left eye disappeared, he retracted his hand, stood up, and said helplessly, I tried my best, but who knew he could hide it so deeply? Suddenly, the giant Buddha below began to tremble again. Back off, it needs to return to its position. He was exhausted from the battle with you just now, and the seal is beginning to have an impact on him again. Xie Zhen explained, let's go ashore first. The giant Buddha in the river slowly stood up, then climbed back to the shore and sat down again where it originally sat. It seemed that everything was back to how it was before, but the overturned cruise ship on the river and the extensive damage to the rocks is a fact that cannot be changed. Many tourists around became very calm, and everyone was thankful that they could survive the tornado that suddenly appeared just now. Has the radio become more powerful? It has turned into a tornado, Fatty said. This is just a trivial matter for broadcasting, but what I'm curious about is, what exactly is here? Subai looked at Xie Zhen and asked. In ancient times, at the confluence of three rivers in Lishan, the Minjiang River, the Qinghai River, and the Data River converged at the foot of Lingyun Mountain. The water was quite ferocious, and boats were often overturned at this point. During summer floods, the river water hit the mountain wall, often causing shipwrecks and fatalities. It was a tragedy. Zen Master Haitong initiated it in order to reduce the power of the flood and save all living beings. He recruited manpower and material resources to build it. Therefore, the original intention of the Lishan giant Buddha was to build it to suppress the three rivers. Xie Zhen said slowly. Later, the giant Buddha was only built. Monk Haitong passed away when he reached the shoulder, and the project stopped. Later, the court allocated funds, built another part, and then stopped the work. When the Tang dynasty entered the era of feudal rule, it still relied on a Jianese Sichuan Jadu envoy to it was finally built with donations. Now it seems that the existence of this giant Buddha is not that simple. You still haven't answered my question, Subai reminded. You may not believe it, but I sensed an evil aura in the body of this giant Buddha, which is not much worse than the evil aura in your body, Ji Zhen said, looking at Subai. That is to say, what is sealed inside this Buddha is a zombie. Subai laughed haha twice, but did you just see that this guy still cherishes the lives of ordinary people, making me like he's like a big villain. From a normal perspective, Bimax, you are a villain in your own right, a zombie that is almost becoming a zombie king. If you did a questionnaire, I estimate that more than 90 people out of 100 would like you to be struck directly to death by lightning at this time. Fatty started to finish off his wounds. It would be understandable if what was sealed inside was a zombie. Zombies are immortal. The one inside may not be as good as you, but I guess the strength is really not much different. Therefore, Monk Haitong could not kill him, so he could only choose to seal it. It has been almost 1,2300 years since the Tang dynasty. The zombie was sealed in the Buddha, and was subjected to incense and sacrifices. Slowly, the ground was imbued with Buddha nature, and maybe he really thought of himself as a Buddha. In Buddhism, there used to be many strange and weird things that became Buddhas, and even ferocious evil things became Buddhas. It is normal for this zombie to regard itself as a Buddha and have a great compassionate heart. After all, bald people or donkeys are the best at brainwashing. The fat man took advantage of the fact that the monk and Buddha were not here, and as a successor of Taoism, he naturally started to talk. Then why was he sealed well before, but suddenly moved when I passed by boat? Subai asked with some confusion. My luck is so bad. It should have something to do with your ancient zombie second transformation, Xie Zhen analyzed. Your current zombie bloodline level and aura are at your peak, so when you approach him on a cruise ship, it is different from your own zombie. Your physique responds, and then he starts to urge the Buddha to strangle you. According to psychological analysis, there are two possibilities. First, he has regarded himself as a Buddha, so killing evil spirits like you is his mission, and it can also be regarded as a way to accumulate merit. Secondly, maybe your appearance made him, who has been dreaming of becoming a Buddha, suddenly realized that he is actually a zombie instead of a Buddha, so he became angry and prepared to kill you to vent his anger. After all, running over to take a photo with him is considered indirect. His Buddha mind was broken. Just like it is best not to try to wake up someone who is pretending to be asleep, otherwise the other person will get angry. Okay, but I don't think that's the reason. Although I know that high-level zombies are not cabbage on the street, and the number of ordinary zombies is also very rare, let alone high-level zombies, but I don't think he dares to treat me openly at this time. Taking action is not in line with the living rules of these guys in this world, Subai said seriously. When he raised his hand to hit me, I felt like this in my heart, it was too unscrupulous. It stands to reason that an incident of this level should be enough to trigger a radio broadcast to issue a real-life mission, but none of us have received it yet, Fatty said a little strangely. The three of us are already the listeners closest to the incident site, but the radio did not give any. Why did we send the mission? Is it just because the giant Buddha sat back obediently in the end, so the broadcaster intends to forget about it? No, a young man wearing a junior high school uniform came over. He had a sunny face and a warm smile. According to what a certain great man said, he was the standard red sun at 7 or 8 o'clock in the morning, the future flower of the motherland. But the flower seems to be a little wilted now, and the aura of dust on it is very serious. At the same time, Subai and the other three people present can sense that the aura of Chen Guang is very empty. If nothing else, he should try his best to get rid of it. It was caused by the quick rush from Chengdu to Lishan. This is also the reason why Subai and Fatty prefer to fly or drive when traveling far away. Although their absolute speed is much faster than that of transportation, they often consume a lot of money. I received a real-life mission announced on the radio half an hour ago, which means there will be changes at the Lishan giant Buddha. I rushed over from Chengdu immediately. Now it seems that the matter is over? With the three of you here, this giant Buddha can't create any waves, right? Chen Guang said. Did the radio announce a real-life mission for you in advance? Subai asked this question, then looked at Qi Zhen and asked, are there many such real-life missions recently? Well, quite a few. During the days when you and Fatty entered the story world, many high-level listeners and even veterans from all over the world received many real-life tasks. Huh. A look of sudden realization appeared on the fat man's face. Could it be that the broadcaster is planning to move its position, and then deliberately relaxes the suppression of those things to let them fiddle with them on their own, and then borrows the hands of the audience to remove these unsatisfactory things? Can the stabilizing factors be resolved without leaving any further consequences? The reason why Boss Liang was not issued a train ticket and continues to stay in this world is also the last pawn left by the radio to solve those leftover things. If there are problems and situations that are difficult for advanced listeners to deal with, Boss Liang will take action. What? Although Boss Liang is timid, solving these things should not be a big problem? Subai guessed. Ji Zhen listened and said nothing, but it seemed that he was also thinking about this. The radio was going to move, maybe in the past 2 years. Now it is starting to clean up the audience and is also using the audience. It makes sense, at least logically, to use the power to eliminate some existences in this world that do not conform to the civilization of this plane. Since you are all here, let's solve this problem together. By completing real tasks together, we can share the favorability, Chen Guang said. I'm not done yet, the fat man chose to refuse. Subai also signaled that he would not participate. Finally, Xie Zhen and Chen Guang went to Lishan again. In fact, the reason why Subai and Fatty did not participate was very simple. The radio was executing the plan to destroy the listeners, and these heretical beings were also the targets of the destruction of the radio. Everyone felt that they were in the same boat. Now it is meaningless to try to win some favor from the broadcaster to get some preferential treatment in the story world. If you cannot prove the truth by then, you will be destined to be treated as garbage. According to Subai's character, he still has "I'm really too lazy to work for the broadcast anymore." In the past, I might have just completed this task together. The fat man was because the funeral over there wasn't over yet. Since Chen Guang and Xie Zhen were with the Buddha, Subai followed the fat man back to his aunt's house. After the funeral was over, it was already late at night and early in the morning. The fat man prepared a few side dishes and some wine to have a good time with Subai. Just sitting by the river with small tables and stools, eating and drinking. Actually, even if my aunt didn't have anything to do with me, I probably wouldn't be too lazy to go on any real-life missions with them. The fat man took a sip of white wine, picked up a piece of dried tea, put it into his mouth, chewed it, and said, "Those two people have not yet entered the world of new types of stories, so their feelings are not as deep as ours. The awareness of broadcasting has really changed." Absolutely. Why should garbage bother garbage? Subai didn't like drinking very much, so he just dealt with Fatty. It can be seen that the death of his aunt was a big blow to Fatty. At least Subai rarely saw Fatty in such a low mood. At this moment, another colorful light suddenly flashed across the river from the giant Buddha. The giant Buddha's huge body seemed to be shaking again, but this time the giant Buddha failed to move and was eventually suppressed back. After Chen Guang and Xie Zhen, two senior audience members, had made sufficient preparations, it was indeed difficult for the Buddha to make a sudden attack like they did during the day. Moreover, Subai and Fatty had caused a lot of damage to the Buddha during the day. Dabai, you said that Alexander the Great taught broadcasting consciousness to play, so that's why today's broadcasting consciousness chose to self-destruct and let your parents replace it and become the broadcasting consciousness of the next big world. So where is the first emperor here? Did he really lead the Qin army under his command to fight to death with those sermon listeners who kept sending them over? What do you think? Subai asked. Haha, I think that although Alexander the Great was defeated first, he finally let this broadcast consciousness play to death on his own. To a certain extent, it can be regarded as a successful revenge. If the first emperor really just led his Qin army to death in a deadly battle, it's cool, but you and I both know that the radio can constantly cultivate big-shot listeners to devote themselves to the battlefield, so the first emperor is just like playing that thing, which is actually meaningless, and the rest is still empty. I don't know, but do you remember that on the day of the broadcast incident, Su Yuhang went to Greece and took away a palace, while Lu Menjia went to Shaanxi and took away all the Qin army's fighting souls there? They couldn't have targeted it without aim, because they're about to become the next generation of broadcast consciousness, and could be the ones who pull out the nails in advance that might be working against them. Those two places should be left behind by the two great emperors. Subai analyzed. Suddenly there was a roar at the soul level from the big Buddha. A figure surrounded by black energy was forced out of the big Buddha by Chen Guang and Xie Zhen. At the same time, the purple light that kept flashing on the black shadow should be the result of Chen Guang and Xie Zhen's advance. Placed restrictions. It seemed that the black shadow had no way to break free. Aren't you going to see your relatives off? The fat man teased. Subai shook his head disdainfully. He would not participate in this matter, but he was too lazy to care about it. It was going to rain and his mother was getting married. Xie Zhen and Chen Guang were still working on the broadcast even though they knew their current situation. Real-life missions can be regarded as a helpless choice. Subai would not help that guy because he might also be a zombie. Ultimately, all this is fate. The father gave his son death, Shang asked me back. Who among you dares to harm me? The black shadow began to roar crazily. Hiss. Subai and Fatty, who were drinking wine and eating side dishes, looked at each other and took a breath almost at the same time. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Disiao. Chapter 919. Subai and the fat man stood up together. There seemed to be some accidents in the situation over there. Of course, the accident did not mean that the black figure broke free from the shackles of Xie Zhen and Chen Guang. After all, Xie Zhen and Chen Guang had prepared for half a day, the big Buddha. They also spent a lot of money fighting with Subai and Fatty during the day, so now they still have to give them complete control over the situation. But what the shadow just shouted seems to be self-reporting to a certain extent. If this shadow is really the eldest son of the first emperor, Fusu, it would be really interesting. However, Xie Zhen and Chen Guang didn't seem to care too much about this. They continued to gather their fishing nets like fishermen and continued to strangle this black shadow. "Don't you want to go take a look?" the fat man standing on the shore asked. "If he is really Fusu, it seems to be of no use if he can be killed like this." Subai's face was very calm, as if he didn't intend to take action, and he didn't even mean to get closer to take a look. The reaction and surprise were just because he and the fat man were chatting about the first emperor before, but his current behavior was more rational. "I think back then, Alexander and the first emperor were the two people in this world who were opposed to causing trouble with broadcasting. Alexander taught broadcasting play with his own death, which led to the broadcasting consciousness to choose its own end 2000 years later due to the torture of boredom. But now, Prince Fusu, who was supposed to be killed by Jiao Zhao in history, suddenly appears in the Lishan giant Buddha, which seems to be foreshadowing something. According to historical records, when the first emperor died, the eldest son Fusu and General Meng Tian jointly stationed at the border of the Great Wall to attack the Xiongnu. After that, Zhao Gao issued a false edict and ordered Meng Tian to commit suicide together with Fusu. Meng Tian's brother Meng Yi was imprisoned by Hu Hai. Killing, the Meng clan was regarded as the die-hard general of the Qin state. Since then, their vitality has been severely damaged, and the morale of the 300,000 Qin border troops led by Meng Tian has also dropped due to this. Finally, this army withdrew to participate in the Battle of Julu. The battle gave birth to the idiom "the cauldron sinks the boat." The Chu overlord won and the last essence of the Qin army was basically burned. Many people will question why Meng Tian and the eldest son Fusu, who clearly held heavy armies, committed suicide so foolishly. You must know that the subsequent Chen Sheng and Wu Guang uprisings also mobilized the masses under the banner of Fusu. This means, considering Fusu's high prestige in the hearts of the people, it is really inconceivable that he would die obediently despite having soldiers and being popular. In the end, it can only be attributed to the foolish loyalty of Fusu and Meng Tian. As the closest minister to the first emperor, Meng Yi's confidant humorous, who could ride in the same car when he went on patrol, actually ended up being imprisoned. It is also unbelievable. Its solution. Now it seems that the deaths of those people are indeed not that simple. The fat man took another sip of half a bottle of liquor in his hand. "Grandma's bear, let's see first, if Mr. Fusu is so shitty now, we have nothing to be excited about, which means that even if the first emperor had a plan, it now seems like a joke." Hearing the fat man say this, Subai was a little surprised and said, "What else are you expecting? What are you looking forward to?" The fat man's eyes were a little red. At this time, he didn't know whether it was because of his temperament or because he was drunk. If the first emperor really has a backup plan in the end and it works, then for us, it should be it's the kind of death you choose that makes you feel less useless. Broadcasting is going to destroy the audience. The next train that Lizzie mentioned is actually still unknown, but a countdown seems to appear on the foreheads of all listeners, and if the Eastern Emperor of 2000 years has really prepared a means to launch at this moment, anyway, if you are going to die, which one is more vigorous and less aggrieved, it seems to be a good choice. However, the latter will undoubtedly be more tragic. After all, when the combat power of this world was the most powerful more than 2000 years ago, the Great Qin Army, which had 100,000 individuals under the first emperor's command and whose combat power was no less than that of high-level listeners, failed to survive the invasion of the radio. With the support of others, now 2000 years later, this world plane has been abruptly reshaped by broadcasting into a medium-level technological civilization plane. It is indeed difficult to see whether the methods left by the original losers will have any effect 2000 years later. How much faith do you have in it? Actually, have you ever thought that the two great emperors of the East and the West might have joined forces, and that they would place the real decisive battle now 2,000 years later instead of in their own time? Sudbais gently stroking the pine branches in front of him with his fingers, he continued slowly, otherwise, it would be difficult for you to explain that the broadcaster had the choice of self-termination because he learned to play. This was prompted by Alexander, and now, when we were already preparing to move and clearing out all hidden dangers, the eldest son Fusu suddenly jumped out of the Lashan giant Buddha. Is this really just a coincidence? There are also the things your parents took away from the East and West before they left, as if they were guarding against something, the fat man added. Sudbai squatted down, put his hand into the cold river, and looked at his reflection in the river. In the final analysis, we still have to see how much this eldest son Fusu weighs. It's not optimistic anymore. Looking at the situation over there, it feels like the black shadow is about to die. The fat man smacked his lips. You really don't want to take action? Or let Chen Guang and Ji Zhen wait for the sake of both of us? We'll kill him later, and let's listen to what the eldest son has to say. It's unnecessary. If he can't even protect himself, whatever he says will only increase our troubles. Sudbai squatted on the spot. It's like a temple. When tourists and believers go to worship, if you see a temple that is dilapidated or the monks inside are sallow and thin, you can just go out and leave. The Buddhas in this temple are obviously not good, because those Buddhas cannot even feed and protect the monks in their own temples. That's true. The fat man burped and looked at Sudbai, who was still squatting by the river, and asked with some confusion, Dabai, what are you doing? Playing in the water. This water is a bit too cold. Sudbai took out his hand and shook it. A wisp of evil energy rose from the palm of his hand. There is a problem under the water. Fatty and Sudbai, who were drinking and running away from home on the shore, could both hear the black shadow's call. Chen Guang and Xie Zhen, who was attacking the black shadow here, were naturally aware of it. People have a tacit understanding and continue to maintain the state of taking action. No matter whether this black shadow is Fusu or not, if he is really Fusu, if he is so weak, it is better to die and let himself. It can be considered a gain for the two of them to increase their favorability on the broadcast side and obtain more favorable conditions for breakthrough. The way to survive is to do whatever it takes. Purple silk threads continuously shot out from Ji Zhen's palms, constantly weaving webs on the black shadow, and the moon wheel in the center of Chen Guang's eyebrows also kept releasing sacred aura to attack the black shadow. Suppress and weaken. By now, the struggle of the black shadow has begun to become weaker and weaker, and it will not be long before it completely disappears. While doing this, Xie Zhen also paid attention to the location of Sudbai and Fatty over there. Those two people haven't come over yet and are still standing there with no intention of interfering. You can actually guess what Xie Zhen is thinking. Get. But, I'm sorry. Xie Zhen's left eye once again glowed with gray light, and a spiritual chain was thrown out directly. This was to give this black shadow a fatal blow. Buzz. 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 3 tremors suddenly came from below the river, and 3 extremely powerful evil spirits rushed out. The power of these 3 evil spirits had reached the level of distorting space. Chen Guang's expression condensed, and with the blessing of the moon wheel, he quickly retreated, but was still rubbed by the evil spirit, and his whole body flew out and crashed into the water. Xie Zhen's spiritual chain that was originally directed at the black shadow had to be withdrawn around him, but when the evil spirit rushed over, the chain broke directly. Xie Zhen's physical body did not have an advantage among the high-level audience, but this time it was directly he was thrown out, but at this juncture, a breast-protecting mirror appeared on Xie Zhen's chest to offset part of the evil spirit. Only then did Xie Zhen's body not be torn to pieces just now, but it fell on the shore of Lashan. Xie Zhen's body was also covered in blood, especially on his chest. A huge wound from his jaw to his lower abdomen was even more shocking. 3 evil spirits were released from the bottom of the river. Two of them severely damaged Chen Guang and Ji Zhen in an instant. The third one was directly submerged into the black shadow. The silk threads and restrictions on the black shadow instantly dissipated, and its figure also disappeared. It has become much more solid at this moment. If it could only be regarded as a black mist before, now it can at least be seen as a human form, and its aura has also grown a lot after the evil spirit was integrated into it. The decadence and depression when they join forces to suppress. The next moment, the black shadow's consciousness scanned the surroundings in an extremely domineering manner. In this area, there were only 4 people who really deserved his attention. 2 of them just tried to kill him, but now they were knocked away by him, and the other 2. Then stand over there. The shadow's gaze was cast towards Sun Island. What followed was an extremely heavy pressure. The first emperor claimed to be emperor in order to surpass the 3 sovereigns and 5 emperors. And this person, if not for historical deviations, should have been the real Qin Tu, the most important person in Chinese history. The second Orthodox emperor. Is this the majesty of the emperor? Faced with this tremendous pressure, Subai said to himself. The fat man who was standing next to Subai and who was just as determined as Subai to watch the show suddenly dropped the wine bottle in his hand on the ground. Pap! The wine bottle was smashed to pieces, and at the same time, the fat man's drunken face suddenly burst into tears and cried loudly. My eldest son, De Qin, have suffered an unjust death. The corners of Subai's mouth twitched subconsciously, resisting the urge to kick the dead fat man into the river. Explanation: Xie Bing, I'm curious how many people have been pronouncing it wrong. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Disiao. Chapter 921. It's not scary if you are blindfolded, because you still have ears to listen. Cover your ears, it's not scary, because you still have hands to touch. It's not scary to tie your hands, because you still have a sense of smell and can smell it. But when your heart is blocked, all the previous conditions and follow-up become a completely meaningless thing. For example, in Lashan at this time, whether it is the sudden rise of the big Buddha during the day and turning the river upside down, or the scene in Lashan at night. The cries of ghosts and howls of wolves that kept coming from the surrounding areas failed to affect the city at all. People only think that there was a hurricane here during the day, which overturned the cruise ship on the river and caused a lot of damage to the big Buddha. And this damn hurricane seems to have a tendency to appear again at night, and the wind sound keeps coming from the window. It's so annoying for people who have to go to work the next day. Fear, no matter how substantive it is, can always make people adapt, but for the vast majority of listeners, what they feel is the biggest fear they have seen on the radio, not the ups and downs in the story world. It is not the dazzling array in the WeChat store, but the kind of ending that even if a city is wiped out, the whole world will collectively forget it. It is the kind of scene that even the closest people will calmly accept after your death. Your life, has been completely stripped away when you become an audience, and you are completely isolated from the past you. The wound was still bleeding, and Xie Zhen's lips were a little dry. Just now, if it weren't for the magic weapon that Boss Liang gave him to protect him, he might have been divided into 2 halves. The best situation would be by then he could still save his soul, but the surge of evil energy just now really shocked him. He himself was not confident that he could successfully escape from the environment. The surface of the river was floating up and down, and Chen Guang's body was still shrouded in a layer of moonlight, but the pores on his body seemed to be overflowing with blood at this time. He looked really miserable. Didn't we agree that after the last group of big guys left on the train, I and others were already considered to be the top group of people in the pyramid in this world? The reality is that it is so fickle and easy to carry sarcasm. The fat man was still crying loudly, looking like an old man and a young man from the Qin dynasty. What, my great Qing, oh no, my great Qin has died? Subai could even hear some of the fat man's slips of the tongue. The fat man did such shameless things without any pressure on his heart. Even just now, the fat man was holding a wine bottle and talking to himself seriously about which option to die. Don't be cowardly. Of course, Subai knew what the fat man wanted, which was nothing more than the word profit. Just as after Pui was kicked out of the palace, many Manchu and Qing dynasty survivors, old and young, would come to pay homage to Pui's house during the holidays. How much loyalty and faith do they have to the Qing dynasty? It's because Pui brought out a lot of cultural relics, calligraphy and paintings when he left the palace, so he had a lot of money on hand. They came to pay homage, and Pui once again felt satisfied that he was still the most illusory person in the world. Then he waved his hand and said, "Look and enjoy." The Black Shadow seemed to have no intention of continuing to pursue Xie Zhen and Chen Guang, even though these two people seemed to have lost most of their resistance. Subai could feel that the other party's goal. It seems to be myself. During the day, when he took a cruise ship and arrived in front of the giant Buddha suddenly moved. This was definitely not a coincidence, and Subai didn't believe in coincidences. At this time, the energy of the other party seemed to be completely locked to him. The zombie aura on the opponent's body was very strong, but the opponent had no physical body. This made Subai a little confused, and at the same time, a strange guess arose in his mind. The other party is obviously an ideological being, but he actually turns into a zombie by relying on this ideology, gathering zombies with his thoughts. Even Subai, who has already reached the second level of ancient zombies, cannot understand this method, because it is too appalling. Next moment, a black shadow appeared on the shore, and landed less than 2 meters away from Subai and Fatty. His figure was still floating in the water, but his reflection could not be seen on the water. Eldest young master, I have finally met you. There is hope for the restoration of the Qin dynasty, there is hope. The fat man was still crying and howling beside him. He didn't mind this kind of performance. After all, the price you pay is nothing more than a box of golden throat products to moisturize your throat. Solitary. The black image wanted to say something, but stopped. He raised his hand. If this condensed cyclone could be called a hand. Gu Ming, you take it down, Gu Ke will allow you to join the nobility. Nani, the fat man was stunned for a moment. Want me to help take down Dabai? But the fat man didn't hesitate. He gritted his teeth and said, "Don't worry, eldest son, I will die for Daqin." "Hey, eldest son wants to capture you, why don't you just surrender quickly?" The fat man drew a talisman in the air, and a purple thunder condensed in his palm, immediately creating a wave of momentum. It has to be said that Fatty has improved a lot in Taoism since he became a dog in the last story world. He is now at the peak level of an advanced listener. The most important thing is that he has become more and more relaxed and comfortable when using Taoism. It seems that I used to use copybooks to practice calligraphy, but now I am casually swiping heavy ink in a romantic style. Subai stood there without moving, just looking at the dark figure in front of him. The other party said taking him, not killing him. It was obviously because he was useful to him, so why was he also useful to him? Is it his identity as the child of Su Yuhang and his wife, or his own zombie body? Subai felt that the latter was more likely. If it was the former, it would be ridiculous. If the first emperor at that time could deduce to this point, how was he defeated by the broadcast? The fat man's thunder curse was directly shot, but not at Subai, but at the black figure in front of him. The loyal old man and young man who had just cried bitterly and grieved for Daqin were shamelessly betrayed again at this time. A barrier appeared in front of the black shadow. The fat man's thunder spell hit it, causing the barrier to sway, but it failed to really hurt the black shadow itself. It seemed that this black shadow also surrendered to him as soon as he came out 2,000 years later. The guy has no sense of trust. Of course, Fatty didn't really naively think that his performance just now could really impress the other party. It was just idleness. When Fatty made his move, Subai also moved. If he didn't move now, when would he move? No matter who he is, even if he is really the eldest son Fusu, even if he admires the first emperor very much, if he wants to sacrifice his life for him. Sorry. No discussion. Boom. Subai's body collided directly with him, and the barrier that had been shaken by Fatty's thunder curse was shattered directly by Subai's collision. Subai successfully approached the opponent, and at the same time, the evil energy rolled around his body, and he cut in. A bony hand stretched out from the shadow and turned towards Subai. Subai felt that the evil spirit of the zombies in his body was reversed at this moment. His energy and blood went retrograde, and his body almost collapsed. Roar. A low roar came from Subai's throat. Even though his energy and blood were flowing backwards, Subai still cut heavily into the black shadow. In the end, the black shadow was directly knocked away by Subai and walked backward for 100 meters on the river. Subai, on the other hand, stood there, his whole body trembling constantly, and his energy and blood force felt vaguely uncontrollable at this moment. Your body was prepared for loneliness. This sound came out from the black shadow, and for a moment, another evil spirit shot out from the river below and merged into the black shadow. The black shadow began to dissipate, and a man so thin that only his bones were left came out of the black shadow. The man's eyes were silver, with a royal arrogance and mystery. It is of the blood of the royal family, the direct bloodline of the first generation of the Orthodox Emperor of China, and its aura has the level of a zombie king. The sense of oppression created by the two complementing each other can really make people asphyxia. Dabai, it looks like I can't handle it. The fat man looked up, then looked at the completely disfigured young master in front of him. You can't run away. Subai wiped the blood stains from the corner of his mouth. Logically speaking, there would be no scarlet blood in his body when he switched to zombie state, but just now, the opponent successfully mobilized his chi and blood to retrograde, which meant that he was injured. His own foundation, the water of the three rivers, is his true nature. The monk in the Tang dynasty cast a giant Buddha to suppress him, but the seal had long been loosened with the passage of thousands of years. Ji Zhen and Chen Guang had previously detained him from the giant Buddha. Coming out is equivalent to giving him freedom again. These are all calculated by him. Hearing this, the fat man was surprised for a moment, and then suddenly realized, in ancient times, the confluence of the three rivers in Lishan, the Minjiang River, the Qinghai River, and the Data River converged at the foot of Lingyun Mountain. These three rivers are his true body? No wonder there are evil spirits constantly shooting from the water. If it comes out and enters his body, this thing is also a bug. Hey, why do I say yet? The fat man shook his head and continued, Sanjiang is its root. Dabai, you carry him. I will try first to see if I can arrange a formation along the texture of those evil spirits to isolate it from Sanjiang. Anyway, he can restore you. It can also be recovered, just be honest. After saying that, the fat man sat cross-legged and began to arrange the formation. At the same time, he did not forget to encourage Subai, don't panic, he is the second-generation emperor, and you are the second-generation broadcaster. No one is afraid of the other. Boom. The position where the eldest son was suddenly shaken, and then his figure appeared in front of Subai, and his momentum continued unabated. He directly carried Subai and crashed into Lishan. Immediately. After 10 seconds. The eldest young master was kicked out again by Subai. Subai kicked the eldest young master into the bottom of the water. But the next moment, the eldest young master quickly appeared again. Next to the giant Buddha, two almost immortal guys started a fight. A fight without beauty. Looking at Subai, who was fighting back and forth over there, Xie Zhen's lips were a little bitter after he was almost KO'd by one blow just now. Is the gap so big? But soon, Siechuming realized that because Subai was also a zombie, the most powerful evil spirit of Master Fusu had little effect on Subai. After thinking about this, Siezhen felt a little better, but he suddenly realized that his current mentality seemed to be getting closer and closer to that of his boss. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 922. Your ancestor is a soldier of our Qin dynasty. Now the following people are committing crimes against me. Does your ancestor know that? Subai punched Fusu in the chest, and Fusu kicked Subai in the abdomen, sending the two of them flying backwards. Ah! Subakian laughed. He finally understood why the eldest son was so interested in himself or his body. The third transformation of ancient zombies was originally created by Su Fugui from the Qin Bing body training method, so in Fusu's eyes, the aura of the Qin soldiers in his body was so strong that it was unimaginable. In this era more than 2,000 years later, this kind of body was not only unique, but it was definitely one that could only be encountered. That's why Fusu planned to take his own body. In ancient times, this meant that if a king wanted his ministers to die, they would have to die, but Subai knew his own affairs. He really had nothing to do with Qin Bing's generation, but now he has a closer relationship with broadcasting. Su Yuhang, and if nothing goes wrong, Lu Men will become the next generation of broadcasting consciousness, and he is a life created by them with their own sperm and eggs. At least in terms of DNA, he is their son. But this fight was really tiring. The eldest son in front of him was not the most powerful opponent Subai had ever encountered, but he was definitely the most difficult one, because he managed to get injured every time. He will have a stream of evil energy instantly shot out from the river below and merge into his body to help him repair his injuries. Of course, the other person probably feels the same way as me. This is equivalent to two characters with unimaginably thick health tanks and much smaller attack power standing there slashing at each other. It's really easy to get tired of the aesthetics. Shi, Qian, Kun, Zwan. Fusu's thin body did not rush over again, but he pinched out a very strange rune with his hands, which seemed to be summoning something, but after a while, angry flames flashed in his eyes. Where does the ancient mausoleum war spirit go? Only then did Subai realize that the other party had just summoned the war spirits of the terracotta warriors and horses from the Qin Emperor's mausoleum in Lintung, but those war spirits were taken away when Lu Menjiao left. Fusu naturally could not summon them now. This was considered one of the few that his mother had duo did something that was beneficial to herself in the end, even though her original behavior was only for herself. I don't understand, what on earth did you do out here, you idiot? Subai really couldn't understand it. If you came out and could do something, such as the broadcast crashing again like before, shaking things up and impacting the rules set by the broadcast, then it would be understandable. You and others, I don't mind being a bystander and clapping my hands and saying, wow, that's awesome. But now that the eldest son has come out, he only cares about fighting with a few high-ranking listeners here. It seems that he has no other thoughts or plans. This makes Subai a little suspicious when the first emperor let his eldest son die and seal the life. Is it really just that father's love is like a mountain and wants to keep his son alive? In fact, there is no layout or backup at all. This feeling of disparity is like buying a ticket to watch Avatar, but what is shown on the screen is country love. Presumptuous. Fusu pressed down his hands, as if hesitating, because he realized that the person in front of him could not be killed in a short time at this stage, and because of the opponent's physique, his zombie evil energy had no effect on him. Even if one is not good, it will give energy supplements to the other party. I understand, this world has changed. You are not the queen of the Qin army, you are the lackey of the devil. It is ridiculous. You have abandoned the pride of the Chinese people and become a pioneer of the devil. You are unworthy of the blood of our ancestors. Subai. Subai understood what Fusu meant, but he was right. Broadcasting entered this world from another world. The Macedonian Empire and the Qin Empire used their whole country to dispatch broadcasting groups of big guys came and fought to the death, which directly led to the collapse and annihilation of the two great empires in the east and the west. But now, at least from Fusu's point of view, he is indeed a puppet soldier and a traitor, and cannot even be regarded as a good citizen. These ordinary people who are ignorant and know nothing can be regarded as good citizens. Now he is following just like the Korean soldiers in Taiwan when the Japanese invaded China. Dabai, I've found the acupuncture points clearly. I'm going to start cutting off the connection between him and Sanjiang. Hey, the two people over there, if they're not dead, will come out to help. Sanjiang is a big blockade. If he doesn't want us to leave, none of the four of us can leave. Now it's really either you who die or I live. The fat man on the shore roared, and the fingers of his hands broke apart instantly. Bloodlines flew out from his fingertips and then fell to the ground. A map of the Lishan Mountains appeared in the form of the fat man's blood. Draw thunder. The fat man shouted low to the sky, and a thundercloud appeared. He planned to use the power of thunder to break the connection between Fusu and Sanjiang, which was equivalent to cutting off the foundation of Fusu. Chen Guang and Xiezhen, who were almost knocked out by one blow before, dragged their seriously injured bodies back to the river. At this time, they naturally knew what they were going to do. Fusu looked at the fat man on the shore, and then at Subai, who was still standing in front of him with an aura that was very familiar to him. A look of helplessness appeared on his face. You are bullying me too much. After finishing speaking, Fusu's hands that were pressing down suddenly rose up. For a moment, the three rivers began to boil. This feeling made Subai feel as if he had returned to the underworld at the place of enlightenment. Immediately, three extremely thick bronze iron chains stretched out from under the river, carrying a prehistoric smell, like three giant bronze dragons. It is no exaggeration to say that their momentum could cover the sky and the sun. Damn it! This bronze. The fat man who was triggering the thunder suddenly couldn't sense the thunder in the sky. When he looked up, he was stunned. The bronze iron chain directly interrupted his connection with the way of heaven. He would definitely not succeed in making a report on his own, but the most important thing was yes, this bronze iron chain gave Fatty a feeling of déjà vu. Suddenly, the laboratory under Lagu Lake appeared in Fatty's mind. The door of the laboratory was such a huge bronze. And the pattern on the iron chain is actually exactly the same as the pattern on the door, and even, exactly the same as the pattern on the bronze box. Bronzeware is made of the same material, but the patterns on it represent different meanings. Just as knives refer to items made of the same material, but they are also divided into samurai swords, Nepalese army knives, etc. At this time, the bronze iron chains that appeared from the depths of Sanjiang were exactly the same as the bronze boxes and bronze doors. They were the same species. Suppress him, the three rivers cannot merge. After seeing the form clearly, the fat man clapped his eyebrows decisively, and a bloody wooden sword flew out. The fat man holding the wooden sword thrust the tip of the sword into the air, and forcibly pulled an iron chain with his own strength. On the other side, Jizhen and Chen Guang joined forces to tie up an iron chain. The third chain was above Subai's head. Even Fatty can see that the origin of this bronze chain is a bit strange, let alone Subai, the person involved. For a long time, that bronze box has been Subai's nightmare, and it also represents himself and another person. Also called the Subai link, the texture of the bronze iron chain that appeared at this time was exactly the same as that of the bronze box. What exactly is going on? Although countless thoughts were flashing through his mind, Subai still subconsciously opened his hands to control the chain above his head. How dare the pearl of rice compete with the bright moon? Fusu let out a hoarse sigh, and the iron chain instantly turned red, as if it had been burned red, with a burning power that burned both the body and the soul. The fat man's blood sword immediately trembled, and his spiritual power was instantly shattered, turning into a mahogany sword and falling in front of the fat man. At the same time, the fat man knelt down and spat out a mouthful of blood. Cheng Guang and Xie Zhen were knocked back by a huge force, but when they were about to take action again, they found that the target of the iron chain was not them. The other two originally controlled iron chains moved towards Subai. The position is rolled down. Fusu's goal from beginning to end is Subai. Subai took out one hand and grabbed another iron chain, but there was also a third chain, which slapped Subai hard without any scruples, but the expected scene of Subai being whipped away was not there. Appeared, the iron chain made a low sound when it hit Subai's body, and then the originally substantial iron chain turned into a phantom and swept over Subai's body. This feeling was just like the projector. Just like walking past. The two iron chains that Subai was holding tightly seemed to have turned into nothingness at this time, and were out of Subai's control. The three iron chains represent the three rivers. In the Tang dynasty more than 1,000 years ago, the monk Haitong discovered the anomalies and hidden things in the three rivers, so he worked hard to cast the giant Buddha and planned to suppress the three rivers forever. The identity of Haitong is not known now, maybe of course, it was an ancient metaphysical power, and it could also be listeners. In ancient times, broadcasts may have existed in other ways such as flying pigeons delivering messages or bamboo slips. The three iron chains that turned into phantoms blocked Subai's surroundings. Subai felt like a stuck grasshopper, unable to break free. After all, these three iron chains represented the three rivers. It is an unimaginable act of generosity to forcefully lock oneself into a trap. Fusu's figure appeared in front of Subai, holding Subai's forehead with one hand. His body was shaking. It seemed that controlling these three chains was a great consumption for him, but fortunately I will get the most suitable new body. After I get the new body, I can. You will be disappointed. Subai's expression remained normal even though he was temporarily trapped, because he knew what Fusu was going to do. Because of this, he seemed so calm. How dare you talk when you are about to die? Fusu's expression suddenly changed. After his skinny palm touched Subai's forehead, he got a shocking result. You don't have a soul. Terror broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 923. Congenital zombies do not enter the five elements and are born from death, so they have no soul and soul, so they are hated by everyone in the world. But Fusu didn't expect that the person in front of him actually had the body of a natural zombie. How could such a thing happen? A person who has practiced Qinbing's body refining technique cannot be a zombie. Fusu is very clear and certain about this. He has also practiced this kind of body refining technique since he was a child. Therefore, he is also sure that the person in front of him, this person is an acquired zombie who was contaminated with the breath of a zombie the day after tomorrow. The acquired zombies have souls. What tricks and things did the Qi refiners in the pre-Qin period never try? It is not uncommon for a living person to be transformed into a zombie. But this person has no soul, which means that his soul and body are combined into one. If he wants to take away his body, the normal procedure is to suppress and seal or simply strangle his soul and then perform magpie nesting on his body. Juzan, he wants his body, but his soul is his body. Therefore, the person in front of him cannot be taken away from him. If you seize the body, the soul you enter will become the opponent's nourishment, and you have no way to control his body. A smile appeared at the corner of Subai's mouth. This was the reason why he was so calm just now. Come. You are seizing the body. I'll let you seize the body. Next moment, Subai's body began to tremble. He was trying to resist the restraints of the iron chains on himself. Moreover, Subai also clearly realized that Fusu was reluctant to control the three iron links. Therefore, it was really hard to say who would win if the stalemate continued. Clear. Gu, I made a mistake. Fusu raised his head, his expression calmed down at this time, and he looked around. This world was no longer the territory of the Qin dynasty that he was familiar with. The eye in the sky had become the real master of the world, and now, as if he was exposed to the gaze of that eye, without any protection. And he failed to get the physical body he wanted, just like a gambler who excitedly thought that he had a chance to follow up and win, but then encountered the embarrassing situation of losing everything and being unable to turn over. The three iron chains began to disappear from Subai's body, and the boiling Sanjiang water below also calmed down. In the distance, the seriously injured fatty and others slowly stood up and stared at the situation here. At this moment, the three of them all seemed to have recognized the reality, that is, among everyone, only Subai had the strength and background to fight against the great Qin master head-on. The rest of them were a little reluctant even if they were beating the drums on the side. When the restriction disappeared, Subai fell down on the lake, his arms drooped, breathing heavily, and at the same time, he kept restraining the distracting thoughts that were rolling in his mind. During the battle, Subai absorbed a lot of nearby vitality. It is estimated that the person in charge of the Lashan Giant Buddha scenic area will be punished for poor management in the near future. At this time, less than half of the vegetation and greenery in the scenic area has withered and died, as if it has entered late winter. The lonely, is gone for some reason, is gone for some reason. Fusu stood there, muttering non-stop, looking a little confused. The fat man covered his chest with one hand and came to Subai's side. Chen Guang and Xie Zhen also came closer. Among the four people, except Subai, the other three didn't look good. Babai, this guy seems crazy. Is it because he can't satisfy his desire to possess your body? The fat man said. How about you go and devote yourself to satisfy him? It looks very pitiful. Subai ignored the fat man's nonsense, but looked at Chen Guang beside him. Are you still going to kill him? Yes, solving him is a realistic task that Chen Guang has taken on, but now it seems that this task is difficult to complete. Unless a few more high-level listeners come to work together, it will be really difficult with the current manpower alone, and Chen Guang can also hearing the implication of Subai's words. Subai didn't seem to be willing to go out of his way to help in this matter. According to the description of Fusu in history books, he should be a person similar to Zhou Yu. At that time, he was an absolute leader in both virtue and appearance, but now he is skinny. It looks like a hemp pole, which is indeed a bit sad. Moreover, after realizing that he could not take Subai away, he seemed a little, giving up on himself. Manager Xie, I have always been curious about why you followed us to Sichuan. Subai suddenly asked Xie Chen beside him. Ji Zhen was stunned for a moment, then smiled bitterly and said, I didn't mean to take advantage of you. In fact, I didn't do that either. It's just that I happened to be coming to Sichuan at that time, so I just went with you. The fat man rolled his eyes, and immediately understood something from Subai's words, and asked, Damn, you were out for a while when Dabai and I entered the story world. Where did you go? Lashan. Since he was asked, Xie Zhen didn't hide anything, but I just came to inquire about the situation. I didn't intend to drag you in, and you don't think I came here to take advantage of you, so I deliberately treated the fat man. Has your aunt taken action? Xie Zhen answered sincerely. Indeed, he did not need to use this kind of thing to destroy the relationship he had finally built with Subai and the others. After the last incident in the cemetery, Xie Zhen, since Zhen helped Subai several times in a row, there was no need for him to take off his pants and fart. So, in fact, in this mission, I am just a helper. Chen Guang also heard something from everyone's conversation, and seemed a little uninterested. Ha! On the shore in the distance, a middle-aged man in a black suit was walking slowly. His speed was not very fast, and he walked steadily step by step, but his body shape kept changing. In an instant, it was as if the entire lake was covered with his figure. But Fusu seemed to turn a blind eye to all this, and even the aura on his body became weak at this time, as if he had given up all resistance and struggle. "Boss Liang, long time no see." Subai said hello to Boss Liang, who had just come here leisurely. Before, Subai had doubted why broadcasting would not let Liang Sen receive the ticket. Of course, because he is a second-generation broadcaster, exporting becomes a constitution is absolutely nonsense. The most likely reason is that broadcasting deliberately left to the boss who is most afraid of himself is also the one who listens to his words the most, so that he can handle some things more conveniently. It is estimated that in the last 2 years, because the broadcaster moved, he had to deliberately shake out some dirty things in the house and do a thorough cleaning, so miscellaneous things that were previously ignored or too lazy to care about may appear, so it is necessary to leave a big boss to take charge of the overall situation. Now look at Liang Sen's appearance and Liang Sen's plan to let Xie Zhen come to Lishan to visit the venue in advance. It can almost be concluded that Liang Sen, who did not get the ticket, must have reached some unknown pie deal with the broadcaster. "Little detective, your progress really surprises me. I think it won't be long before you are at the same level as me," Liang Sen said with a smile. "Are you equally cowardly?" Subai said calmly. Obviously, Boss Liang has been watching the show for a long time. Why didn't he take action before and only showed up now? The reason is also very simple. Like himself, he is worried and doubtful about the timing of the appearance of the great Qin master and the possible chain reactions. After all, Lu Menjiao and Su Yuhang have been sharpening their swords for 20 years, so the broadcast has to be suspended for a period of time. Repair: the first emperor spent 2,000 years sharpening his sword. But looking at it now, it seems that many worries and speculations are unnecessary. The appearance of this eldest son is not like the landing of a far-reaching chess piece, but like an accident that neither party expected. Therefore, after Boss Liang confirmed that it was safe enough, he ended his watching from the other side and walked out. Coward, Liang Sen seemed to deliberately taste the word carefully, but he did not delay his own business. When he approached Fusu, he reached out and pinched Fusu's neck. The Sanjiang River immediately had a tendency to churn again, and at the same time, the clanging sound of the iron chains also came from the depths of the river. The scene where the eldest son lifted the bronze chains of the Sanjiang River just now seemed to be about to reappear at this moment. But Liang Sen just stepped lightly on the water with his left foot, and Sanjiang's restlessness instantly calmed down. This detail made Subai's pupils shrink suddenly. And Fusu was being pinched by Liang Sen, as if he had given up resistance and was completely disarmed. Some things cannot be changed. This is a rule that overrides the world. Under this big rule, we are like the ancients who saw the iceberg of the universe for the first time with a newly invented astronomical telescope. It's the same as a dime. Liang Sen seemed to be talking to himself or talking to the people around him, but he didn't know whether he was talking to the eldest son in his hands or to Subai behind him, who just said he was cowardly. Traitor, coward, pitiful. Fusu just looked at Liang Sen, who controlled his life and death, with cold and disdainful eyes. "I admit that you are brave and great, and I also admit that I am humble and cowardly, but you really can't win, whether it is 2,000 years or 2,000 years later. This is fate, there is no need to struggle." Boss Liang lifted Fusu up, looked at Fusu's face, and asked, "What did you get for hiding and dormant?" The war spirits in the terracotta warriors and horses have long been taken away, and the ancient Macedonian palaces in the west have also been moved out of this world. The backhand and hidden things you buried after your failure more than 2,000 years ago have been unearthed and destroyed by generations of listeners performing real-life tasks over the past 2,000 years. So, your awakening and appearance today, even in this era, this post-broadcast period, seems a bit abrupt. You have no allies, no partners, and even some of the things you arranged before can help respond to you. As things have long since disappeared. You are like a clown, a wretch living in your own illusions. Your empire, your father, and what your generation insists on actually have no meaning at all. Why bother? The fat man on the side took out a cigarette, bitten one for himself, and handed one to Subai. In line with the concept of not corrupting a good student, the fat man did not give Chen Guang a cigarette. Li Li, regardless of his injuries, took a heavy sip, and the fat man muttered to Ji Zhen beside him. Can you tell your boss to stop the nonsense and take action quickly to solve the problem? The more he talked about me, the more he felt like a traitor and puppet soldier who had captured a loyal and unyielding 8th Route Army soldier, and shamelessly and flatteringly told the soldier who would rather die than surrender.